Hello, everyone. Before we get started today, I wanted to let you know, especially if you are one of my loyal listeners that is looking for a little bit more, I've created a paid subscription option for the podcast for 99 pence per month. On top of this being ad-free and just purely being the essence of the episodes, I will be doing bonus episodes, some personal update episodes, and we'll also include any information, invites into any virtual workshops or online things that I do in the future. So if you fancy it, check out the show notes below with the link and enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Self-Improvement Project. This is a bit of a special one. We have passed the 2-year mark of the Self-Improvement Project podcast. 2 years of at least a weekly podcast episode. And to mark this occasion, I've got my good friend Dan onto the podcast, where we just use it as a bit of a space to reflect. More so for reflections on lessons learned and to just take a step back to look at the journey and also discuss the future of the Self-Improvement Project as well. Dan and I are good friends. We go back quite a long way and we've shared this journey since the start. So I hope you enjoy listening to our thoughts, and I hope you're as excited as I am for the future of the Self-Improvement Project. As always, reach out, let me know what you think and what you would like to see maybe with the Self-Improvement Project over the next few years as well. Enjoy! Yeah, so 2 years of the Self-Improvement Project. Trying to think, we did our first. Do you remember we did Atomic Habits? That was quite early on.
I do remember that because it was absolutely roasting that day.
During the first lockdown.
And I had that was the first one we'd done. And we had talked so much about that book. And I had done so much preparation ahead of that podcast. I remember sitting on my bed, I think it was summer sometime, and absolutely sweating. It's like a sauna. But I think that was the first one we done. But I think looking back, a lot of things related to that can be attributed to where you are now, which I think is quite cool.
I think I know we've got notes for it and stuff, but I think the whole 2-year journey, I was thinking about that as a thought, and it is just the consistency of it. That was what we chatted about in that pod, where it was the importance of that and the different ways of getting it, and everything over the whole 2 years comes down to that one a week episode, putting it out there, seeing what happens.
Well, that's what I was thinking actually, because obviously I knew we were having this call, and I know we're kind of reflecting on the past few years, and the one thing that stood out to me was there's a graph in that James Clear book, and it's all about progress and people's attitudes towards progress, and he's basically referring to how success and progression, it's not a linear graph, right? It's not a linear kind of movement. So a lot of it is, you're kind of flatlining for a while, might not be seeing as much progress, and then you get to a point and that line just starts to shoot up. And I think that is definitely what I think you've experienced, because I remember when, and obviously we're talking about the podcast over 2 years now, but I remember when you first started, the goal was to have a podcast a week. You'd put it out, you'd see what you're getting, and I think you won't disagree with me here, but probably didn't gain as much traction as you thought at the beginning.
Or as much as you want, anyway. You always have
Yeah,
like a desire of what you think and want will happen, and it doesn't. Yeah.
exactly. And it was quiet for quite a while. And then it just seemed to, I don't know, like, I tell you, it's like a snowball, right? It
Mm,
starts small, you keep growing, and then it gets bigger and bigger. And I think that's what's happened here. It's
yeah.
quite cool to see. And I think a lot of people probably would have stopped at the start. So, doing it for like 5, 6 months, maybe not getting as much traction as you would have liked. Be quite easy for people to just kind of stop at that point and maybe give it up. But yeah, I think you keeping at it, you obviously feeling the benefits of it, which is really cool.
Yeah. It's good to chat to like more people. And honestly, because it's been good looking back. I think it's not the achievement of having done it for 2 years. It's the ability to look back at how it's gone is it's just fun. And honestly, I was looking at the first, so like 2020, May 2020 was when the first episode, and that the listens for the rest of 2020 were horrific, to put it kindly.
Yeah,
The honestly, I was looking at it the other day, and it's like in the tens. Like
it would have been me, would
you're
have been the
looking at it,
boys.
yeah.
Yeah,
Talk about that flat line. It's like it's dead.
yeah,
But the whole of 2020, and I think it's if you're really wanting to do something and you're committing to it consistently, you have to have the complete peace of mind that you're like no one's gonna like listen to it, watch it, read it, whatever it is, and you've got to be okay with that. If you're not okay with that, it's like it would really knock your confidence.
yeah.
But again, it's funny looking back, seeing that flat line and being like, yeah, just got to keep going. Just got to keep
Well, it's
going.
it's it's about having that it's about having that understanding of what the end goal is, and just being confident enough in the end goal that you're able to kind of stick through it and kind of go through times where it might be frustrating. Also don't want to like bring it back to myself, but I can relate to that in terms of going to the gym, things like that. You go through
Yeah.
massive periods of just not seeing any progress. And yeah, it can be very demotivating, but then you start to see kind of changes here and there, and I think that's very similar to what you've experienced with the podcast. So no, really cool. I think probably one of the, and I guess we'll touch on kind of like reflections on the past year and just the past 2 years as a whole. But I think one of the coolest things for me, you touched on numbers, um, was the first time. So you were obviously going through SoundCloud to start
Mhm.
with. I think that was your
Yeah.
main kind of avenue, and you kept sending me. So I guess for context, for like folk listening, like Lawrence and I went to school together, so we're obviously good pals. Um, and Lawrence will send me stuff like updates, things like that, just keep me update on how the podcast is going. And with SoundCloud, you'd send me these like screenshots of countries that people were listening from, and it was going as far as like Australia. You had like small towns in America that I'd never heard
Yeah.
of. You had places like Ukraine,
Mm.
like Italy. Honestly, it was all over. And I was like, wow, this is cool. Like, this is blowing up a wee bit. And I remember the first time you switched from SoundCloud to Spotify, I was walking to the
Mm.
shop and you sent me a screenshot of the numbers. And I think you'd probably felt as if, I mean, not kind of dissing SoundCloud here, but you'd probably felt like SoundCloud had sold you out a wee bit because how they
Yeah.
were reporting on numbers was so different to Spotify. And you see the numbers coming through on Spotify, and it's
Yeah.
insane, wild, isn't it?
Different world. Yeah. And I think there was two things that it was like the Spotify Unwrapped, at the end of the year, because obviously the podcast, even though being hosted through SoundCloud, it was on Spotify as a platform, and when they send their own thing like you do as a listener, they do it for the podcasters as well, and it was just mental, in comparison to we were expecting. So yeah, it was pleasant to say the least.
Yeah,
Kind of
thinking you turn into Joe Rogan or something.
a bit more hair.
Yeah,
Va- Validating, I think would.
less conspiracy theories maybe. I like Joe Rogan, by the way. I'm not.
For the
I'll
record.
caveat it by saying that.
Um, I think the first part I started to notice though was it was definitely after a whole year. So obviously last year we like sat down and we're like, oh, how's the year and all this kind of stuff, and it'll be different to what we're chatting about now. But it was definitely July 2021 when that was the first time people started like messaging me,
Mm.
like off their own back to just let me know what their thoughts were, which was again like really nice but very odd because I'd not had it before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, certainly from like my point of view, that is or getting those kind of messages, like to me that seems almost like your not definition of success, but that is part of success to you, right? Like
Mhm.
having that impact on people and people you know, feeling like they're able to take time out of their day to get in touch to let you know how something's made them feel. Like that must be a good feeling.
Yeah. Um, I think it's my favorite part. I think
Yeah.
it's definitely the best bit about it because it's just the most human part of it. There's no metric that you can use to when someone feels compelled to let you know that they really enjoyed it, you know. Um,
And obviously you can't give anything away, but is there any kind of particular interaction that you've had with someone that's kind of like stuck with you, or is it more just like a whole, just having that nice feeling that people do feel compelled enough to thank you for what you're doing and knowing that you're kind of making a difference to some people's day-to-day lives.
yeah, I think it's funny because you don't realize this when you're doing it off of you like off your own back and your own thoughts and your own interests, but themes start to emerge from people messaging you about why it helps them. And I think, and maybe it's lockdown, maybe it's just life in general, but a lot of people message and say that they, you know, feel a bit down. It helps them feel better. It helps them feel more hopeful about things, but also better about themselves. So I think as a whole, it's more you get these similar messages, but the I guess the strength of the language that people use is very powerful about how it's helpful, which is good. Um, but I think when people have reached out, I always reply to them as well, which I feel is like really nice because it again shows that like I'm a human on the other end as
Yeah,
well.
exactly. It's that human aspect. I think it's that kind of connection aspect, and there's plenty podcasts I've listened to in the past that I've been compelled enough to get in touch with folk after, and you just don't hear back. And yeah, it doesn't really make you feel any different about the podcast. You still like the podcast, but I think having that interaction and an ability to just converse with someone who's obviously making an impact, I think is quite powerful for those people, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I think as well, and it leads nicely onto what the thoughts are for the future of self-improvement project as well, because you obviously think about it a lot and you think about it all the time, and these things that I really like, where I like that I can have messages back and forth with people, and I think a bit of a common narrative that exists with these types of projects is that they get really big, that people become famous, that they look for growth, and in a size sense, they look for growth. But having thought about how much I like the elements that exist just now, I'm very compelled to keep it to my own thing, and it doesn't need to be that big because it's one of those things that if people need it, they'll find it. And the I guess the relationships that you build and have with people that are like, these are still early days, you know. If
Yeah.
there's those touch points with people now, like these are going to be the people that tell their friends and tell people that they care about or feel like it would help them. Those are going to be the most important people to the self-improvement project. And
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's an important kind of point to make, is making that distinction between, you know, what success maybe looks like to other people, and what it looks like to you. And I think you've kind of found what your own success is like, and I think those conversations have, ultimately kind of led you to, you know, opening up the coaching side of things, right?
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
that consistent communication has opened up perhaps a new avenue, for yourself that didn't exist, when you started it. I'm not even sure if that was something you considered when you started it at all. Or,
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, even like a year ago, it wasn't even on the radar. But I think if you get too big that you can't respond to people and you can't have that human element, then what's the point? It just becomes an all-consuming machine that, you know, you can look into the world and find millions of those. Why is it the narrative that you need to do that?
yeah,
I'm in quite a nice position where now that it's so organic and it's so human that I can do things like coaching. I can, you know, someone can email me today and I'll probably read it over the next few days and be able to reply to them in the next few days and have the time to think about it rather than either not have time or not have the time to actually put in a thoughtful enough reply, do you
yeah,
know? And
exactly. And I think that comes back to, again, like I said, like having the confidence in yourself to know what the end goal is, and to know what drives you when you're doing it. Whereas I think a lot of people, like you said, would probably be consumed with, you know, growth, numbers, these kind of things. When in reality, maybe that doesn't mean as much as having that kind of personal impact on people. How's the coaching been so far? I know it's relatively early doors. I know you've had a few kind of sessions, but talk us through how that's gone.
yeah, coaching's been good. Probably late 2021 is when I first dabbled properly with it, with more kind of experimental, um, an experimental mindset, I would say. You know, the kind of, I'm trying this to see if I like it, see how it goes. But at the same time, like, people volunteer their time for it. That's, you know, more precious than anything. So that was invaluable experience and obviously gave me an opportunity to see how the style works, how feasible it is, um, you know, with people all over the world. And the the really reassuring thing was that I think it maybe comes back to kind of experience within the job world of working in education the whole time, but you get a sense of style and how you can help people, and I feel like from that I'm very comfortable with the style that I use, but at the same time working with those people gave me such insight into things that have evolved into now, where I'm working with people now and having even more impact, um, as well. So that's been really good. And that, to be honest, I don't know how it will go. I think I prefer, you know, if you think of coaching, there's lots of different ways you can do it, but one-to-one coaching for me is definitely the most, it's the most, you know, relevant to me and where I feel like I can make the most impact. I don't, and again, it might look back and laugh, but like group stuff, big call stuff with lots of people. That's just not me. I don't enjoy it. I don't like it. I feel it takes away that personal touch to an extent. And yeah, the one-to-one side of things has been great. And I think it's more, I'm excited to see how over the months it continues to develop and grow, and see what other avenues it will lead down as well, because that's what
Yeah,
everything has led to so far.
absolutely. And it's quite interesting as well, because I know you've had conversations with like literally folk around the world. Um,
Mhm.
folk in the States. I think there's been quite a few folk in Europe as well. And I think the good thing of that is, like you touched on, it's personal to you. It's personal to whoever you're doing it with. And I don't necessarily think. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't necessarily think it's like anything too extra outside of what you're doing. It does feel very organic because it's come from what you're doing in the first place. Like, you haven't gone out to kind of seek this. This has just been an evolution of what you'd set out to do in the beginning, and this has just come as a byproduct of it, which I think is really cool. I mean, it would have been cool even if you'd set out to do it, but I think just stumbling on it um, is quite nice to look back on and see how that's panned out.
Yeah, I think it always comes back to that analogy of, are you going like a wide surface but not very deep, or are you like over a very narrow surface and going very deep on things? And I think obviously the self-improvement project is very unique with what's talked about. Very, it's very inward, it's very introspective, it's very self-management topics that are discussed. And obviously the self-improvement project is a complete monologue. It's, apart from us chatting and a few others, there's never been any kind of conversation, like interview stuff. So it's very unique. But then that has then gone deeper into the coaching, where it's we're coaching, but we're coaching that individual on their own self-management. It's not thoughts from me and then implementing. It's right, we work together to um help that individual become better at managing themselves or improving themselves from a very unique perspective, which is good. And I think that's where you can make like a real impact with things. And then in another bonus is that helps me get even more clear on what it is I'm doing, the next layers and the next levels of self improvement and self management and inward development, I guess. So
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. And I guess that kind of brings me on to my next question. That would be like, where do you think the self-improvement project will go in the future? But I think before that, we're touching on the coaching, we're touching on the numbers. I think those are two of the big changes that I've seen over the years, like things that we probably didn't anticipate at the beginning.
yeah,
I don't know if you want to touch on the sponsorship side of things, if that's something you're comfortable talking about. I think that's
yeah.
another thing. But is there anything else that you just did not see coming, like big changes when you look back over the 2 years? Is there anything else that kind of springs to mind?
I'm happy to chat a wee bit about the sponsors. I think that was like very close to 2 years before anything towards that came, and I'd say at this moment I'm happy with what that is bringing from a bit of a validation point of view, a bit of credibility with, you know, there must be something that I'm doing right to justify that becoming a part of the podcast. And hopefully that will resonate with people who listen as well. But I think the only other thing that I would really touch on, and this might be quite good because it's more of I guess it's more of a holistic thing and maybe more of a maybe less tangible thing, but more of a like concept or idea that maybe people, that if they're listening, that they can kind of take a little bit from as well and implement, is the like complete identity element of it. That like the self improvement project is now completely part of who I am. when you start, you're doing it, you're trying to prove something to not to the world, but to yourself. But when you create the habit and you're turning up consistently without any expectations of success, whatever that is, when it becomes part of who you are and people are talking to you about it, or your mates are taking the mick out of you for it, but it's like it justifies it. It's like, oh
Yeah.
right, this is who I am now.
It's
Which is
inextricably linked, isn't it?
yeah, and it's nice. It's validating. Um, when obviously you spend a lot of time invested in whatever project it is that you're doing, but it's really validating to know that when people ask you about it, they must have heard or had conversations about it already, and that when they think of you, think of that thing. Which, again, if it's something that is purely driven by your own interests, curiosities, passions, that's like a really encouraging thing. That's a really motivating thing. And I think anyone can do something for a few months and say that that's who they are. But when you don't need to say who you are or what you do and people ask you about it because you just turn up and do it every week, I think that's a real shift in identity and in that side of things as well, which again over the 2 years you don't set off with that expectation, but it does become a part of it as well. But it's good to live up to as well. You feel like, right, this is what I do now. So, I'm spending a weekend or I'm spending an hour of my time towards the podcast. That's what I do.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've never really looked at it from that perspective before, but I think you're definitely right. I think when people bring it up, like even like my mum like brings it up if I like talk about it, she's like, "Oh, it's Lawrence doing this podcast, like still doing
Hmm.
this podcast," and it just goes to show it is that consistency to the point that people can't necessarily mention one thing without mentioning the other, and it's providing that. I think ultimately as well, it's providing a sense of purpose, which I think is massively important. Obviously, this isn't your I don't know if the listeners kind of know this, but this isn't your full time gig. Like you
Nope.
you have a job. Um, I think a lot of people listening to podcasts sometimes think that people doing a podcast is their full time thing, but you're working on the side.
Mm,
Um, Not even working on the side, like you're working full time and this is on the side.
mm,
And it's having that kind of understanding of, yeah, perhaps like what I'm doing full time isn't necessarily, um, feeding into my goals, but having this and having that sense of purpose and being consistent with it, I think is really important from, a mental standpoint. I think it's massively important to have something to work towards and feel like you're contributing in some way, even if um, your kind of full time thing isn't giving you that. And I think that's probably um, what a lot of listeners might feel, right? Might feel a bit dejected with their jobs. They might feel a bit dejected with, I don't know, if they're studying, it's maybe not something they want to do. And it's understanding that, you know, sometimes that is okay. It's having that thing on the side, like your full time thing doesn't have to be, what fills you up and what provides that sense of purpose. You can have things on the side to work towards on top of it, and it will still provide that sense of accomplishment.
yeah, and honestly, the timing of this is really interesting just now, but I know looking back, it'll be just as interesting that we're capturing it because I guess the first year and a half of the podcast, when people were writing to me or writing about their situation, it was they found it reassuring. They found the mindset side of things very helpful to change their perspective. But now, people that have been reaching out or writing to me more recently are definitely down that purpose element. There's a hole, there's a gap, there's some sort of emptiness that exists from a lack of purpose, and that might be from their job, but there's a realization of, oh, that doesn't need to be the thing that gives me purpose. I have complete freedom to to choose whatever it is I want to do that will serve my purpose. For me, it's the podcast, and hopefully that provides people with a bit of, oh, you can go and try things and see what works, and
Yeah,
it gives you that
exactly.
sense of accomplishment and fulfillment and things like that.
But
So
I
that's
think
definitely been more recent. Yeah.
that's cool because I think there's that there's almost that kind of societal pressure and expectation that certainly we grew up in Scotland. I'm sure it'll be the same in the UK and other places. That your job is your purpose. Like that's almost what we're always told when we were at school. It's like, right, you study this, you're going to go on to study this because you'll be doing this. Like where we're from, there's a big oil and gas industry. So I think a lot of what we were told at school was like, right, you're going to go work in oil and gas industry. Whether they said that explicitly or not, that was almost what was implied. And it's like you kind of get that impression that what you go into from your job perspective is going to be your purpose. And I think when people go into that and it's not their purpose, there's a real disconnect and almost like a feeling of a letdown. So yeah, I think hugely beneficial for people to realize that you can't, like, that's okay. You can have things on the side that serve that purpose outside of what society probably tells you is your purpose.
Yeah. And it's so interesting now because I think the narrative, especially in recent years, we're being sold a bit of a false dream from corporate or the job sphere where everyone's trying to sell the dream of meaningful work. And if you work for us, you will find work with meaning and purpose but they're aware of it. They're aware that there's
Yeah,
this thing that people are looking for. And it's a bit sad because they're almost feeding off of the desperation that exists because jobs can be
100%.
so soul sucking, but they're feeding into that, and we're almost being sold a bit of a false narrative that if we do this job, we will find meaning, and it's like the promised land, but it's not. Jobs are jobs. Jobs are, for years I've had different jobs, and at some points in my time working there, they've given me meaning, and at other points they have not. But I think it's very dangerous to pigeonhole that if you have a job with meaning, then that's it fixed.
Yeah.
You will always find new problems to be interested in or discover. And I think it is just very dangerous to be like, I want to do this job because it's going to give me purpose. And then when you get there, like you say, there's almost like a bit of a letdown of, oh, the the days aren't that exciting, the tasks aren't actually that good, I'm being put into a box sort of thing. And
Absolutely.
the reverse is that these sort of projects that you have, that you invest, even if it is an hour a week into and just commit to it, it does over time just accumulate into this ball of purpose that no one can take away from you, and also no one can tell you what to do with it. They can't say, oh, stay in your box, or you can only hit this certain level. You're free to run with it as you want. I've not had anybody telling me you can't do coaching, or you should really think about that, or you know if you're doing coaching, you can only do it for a certain bit and then you must go and do this or whatever. It's
It's having that freedom, right? It's the ability to kind of steer your own ship and
mm,
not necessarily having to answer to people, and ultimately just it comes down to being accountable for yourself, right? And I think that in itself is very powerful, and I think that's something that probably isn't as readily available to people in careers, like careers you're offering answering to other people. It's not something you're necessarily passionate about. But I thought it was quite funny what you mentioned about jobs like selling that dream of purpose, and a lot of the time it just doesn't happen. I don't think like corporate work is by its nature. I just don't think it's even possible to provide that purpose. Obviously, there's going to be people who work in some jobs who have that, and if so, that's absolutely fantastic. There's going to be people who um, have grown up wanting to be a certain thing all their life in a certain profession, and they study they might work towards it and they get it, and that's amazing. I guess one example I would use would probably be your wife. Shout out, shout out Anna. But yeah, I think on the whole, I don't think traditional work necessarily offers that, which I think is why it's so important to find something that you can be the master of your own destiny with, and just push it yourself. I think that's really empowering.
Yeah, and not to bang on a wee bit about how grim the life of work can be, but like it's quite sad that sometimes that when you find the most meaning is before you get punted up because you're good at what you do and you find meaning with it, you get punted up into like you get promoted into a managerial position where you're not doing what you love anymore. Like it's one of the saddest things that exists, and I think it happens too often. But it's just
funny, we're going down this like anti-work route, right? Like we speak about it all the time. Like Lawrence and I will chat about it on like WhatsApp and stuff, and we'll have our frustrations. And I think probably what folk are hearing now is just our frustrations coming out and manifesting, right?
But yeah, those are reflections over the last 2 years as well. I guess it's part of it. It's helped the.
Well, I guess it feeds into it, right? It gives you more, like we touched on, it gives you more validation to do what you're doing, and I think that experience about work, it feeds into it, and it's all part of the journey. But I guess like kind of next steps. Obviously, we've spoken about reflections on the past 2 years, like things you've enjoyed, things you might have found a bit more difficult. But in terms of next steps, where do you think self-improvement project will go? Like what is the goal just now, or is it just going to be very much the same as what you've been doing in terms of making sure it's organic and just seeing where the wind takes you?
Yeah, I think obviously because we're 2 years in, we've got a little bit more structure around what it's the response that it's getting or how it's being received, and then that guiding it towards things that I also enjoy and want to explore. So that obviously starts very wide when you start a project as you're discovering a lot, but once you get those experiences, you start to narrow down. And to be honest, I think as I alluded to a wee bit before, I want to keep it small. I want to keep it my own thing. I don't want this to grow into a company or a team of whatever. I think it's almost one of these, and maybe it's one of these trendier phrases that goes about now, but it's definitely not out with the realms of possibility of it being a one person podcast that is a lifestyle business. It's a business that allows me to put all of my energy into creating the best content, the best coaching for people. And I think it's not really making it more complex than that. I think it might sound a wee bit kind of towards myself, but I think that's the only way that I would really want it to be. I'm not interested in the big growth element of it. I think it definitely needs to be that, right? How is it sustainable? How is it going to serve the people that it's serving just now and continue to do that without it being lost or being forgotten? When things get so big that you think of customer service becoming terrible, but I also wouldn't want to grow it to such a point where customer service is such a vast thing. I wouldn't want to spend my time making it a good thing. I feel like if you keep it small and personal, then your customer service will always be good. You can always spend the time treating people like human beings and things like that.
And I think that's good as well, because that is very much like staying true to how the journey's been so far. Even thinking back to like the very beginning, I can't even think if you had any goals for it. I think it was more just a case of, I want to do this, I'm going to see where it goes. and you just learnt as you went along. So I think keeping that attitude, and I guess being able to stay consistent, being able to, still reply to people, having that personal connection, it's obviously something that's very important to you. I think it's something that's quite important to folks who listen to your podcast. Um, so keeping it in that same fashion is probably, I feel like, the best way to go. And it's one of these things, you've done that for so long, different avenues have opened up. We're talking about sponsors maybe getting in touch with you. You're talking about maybe evolving into the coaching side of things. And it's a case of continuous improvement, right? Like, I'm sure you get feedback from people all the time, positive feedback, you might get negative feedback. It's taking those things on board and just running with it. And yeah, just seeing what happens. And I think if you do that, that is the best way to kind of stay true to what you've done so far. And I think that'll probably come through as well when folk listen to it, which I think is great.
Yeah, I guess I would want to be sitting here in 2 years' time and say that it's still just having that impact, but maybe just still deep and narrow. But there's almost like more people that it's having that deep impact with, I guess, overall. But I don't think anything too different to what we've had over the last few years. Obviously, we've got more shows now, 3 a week, but I wouldn't have been able to do 3 a week for the first 2 years. I think having a base of 1 a week off of everything that we've chatted about has allowed me to be able to do 3 a week, which is good. I'm not sure as well, and it'll be again interesting to see, because I've tried it before, but also like the Patreon element of it. I'm maybe going to explore that a little bit over the second half of 2022, see how it lands, just from like again, I know I keep repeating myself, but the deep and narrow impact that it has on people, I would rather that Patreon element to it supporting the project rather than the growth of like a stereotypical company side of things, investment, or whatever you want to say. It's just, that's how I would want it to be for my own peace of mind and that kind of purpose filling side of things.
Yeah, I think Patreon is just, it's an extension of what you're doing, right? With Patreon you can get bonus content, things like that. You might be able to I mean, if people have access to you just now, like people can message, but it's an extension of that. It's not doing anything different. It's just taking something, I think, that you feel has worked well so far and just building on it. So it's not doing something for the sake of it. It's doing something because something works well, and this has the potential to serve the listeners even more. So that'll be exciting. See how we get on with that. And I think like I keep saying, the longer you're in it, the more doors are going to open. It's just, making yourself available. These opportunities will come.
Yeah. And it's just good to be able to have the time to, write back to people and spend time with people and spend time thinking about, the quality of coaching or the quality of the podcast and things like that. And I think that's just how I would want to continue, to be honest. I think that's where the likes of having more time to spend on it will improve all of that aspect side of things. So yeah, that'll be good. But I mean, we might sit down in a year or 2 years time and be like, wow, that was not what we thought.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I don't think 2 years ago we would have thought it would be where it is just now in terms of where it's gone, with kind of global reach and stuff, and thousands of listeners. So who knows where the next 2 years will take us. But I'll be here in 2 years' time if you want to chat about it. So just give me a shout.
Oh yes. Right. I think that'll do. I think that's a wrap. Happy with that?
I'm happy. Can we like say something, like cue the music and then start the theme tune or something?
Oh, so like a wee rundown into, like a wee countdown into the theme tune. Something
I don't know. I feel like it's too planned now. I think that one had to be natural.
Cue the music.